Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting, May 4, 2017. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm going to place the imaginary gavel over to our town manager's hands so he can, next order of business, reorganization of the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, at the moment. And my role is very brief this evening. I will entertain motions for the role of Chairman of the Board. And one hand has gone up first. Mr. Burbine.
Would nominate Ken Coyle as Chairman of the Board.
A motion for Mr. Coyle as Chairman. Are there any other motions for Chair?
I'll second that.
There's a second for that. That would have... second, I'm sorry, that would have been the first thing to do, is get a second. Are there any other motions for chairman? Seeing no other motions. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Seeing none? Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, you are now the chairman of the board.
I'll let you finish the...
Okay, are there any motions for the role of Vice Chairman? Mr. Burbine.
I would nominate Bob Manning as Vice Chairman.
Is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Are there any other motions for Vice Chairman? Seeing none, all those in favor of Mr. Manning as Vice Chairman?
Aye.
Thank you. All those in, okay. All right, congratulations, Mr. Manning, and
Now we play music.
back to you. All right,
I'm staying there.
very good.
Stay there, Tom, yeah.
I am, that's how we have to move.
Okay, good. All goes well, you won't hear from me again tonight, then.
I don't get to move up, being.
Okay.
No, you don't get to move up yet.
year.
Fair enough.
I was gonna say no offense, but Bob's a lot better looking than you, Alex.
Hey, come.
Jesus, let's not start this off
We know
that way,
that's not
please.
true.
I'm not going down that
We
road.
can move those tags around, so.
Right. The first thing we normally do at a regular meeting is public announcements.
I have one.
Okay.
Abington High School Spring Concert. The Abington High School Band will present their annual spring concert on Wednesday, May 10th at 7 o'clock at the P.K. Smith Music Room. The concert will feature a variety of concert literature, some familiar, some favorites, some Green Wave spirit. This will likely be the final concert in the P.K. Smith Music Room, so we hope to see everyone there. Thank you.
Burbine?
I can read the other one if you want.
No, you can read the other one.
This is another high school event. The Art Portfolio Exhibition. Please join us on May 11th to celebrate our art portfolio students at the Abington Public Library. There's a number of students that are exhibiting their work, and a reception will be held from 5 o'clock p.m. until 6 o'clock p.m. at the library on May 11th.
Thank you. That's it. All right. Our first order of business, action discussion item is we're going to talk about articles on the proposed articles in the annual town meeting warrant. I guess Article 14 is the adoption of the Stretch Energy Code. Quickly, I'm going to read that just so the people out there in TV land know what we're talking about, unless it's really long, and then your article. I'm briefly going to read just the beginning of it, because it is a really long article. And I'm going to ask the town manager maybe to give us the Reader's Digest version of what the Stretch Energy Code means. Article 14, to see if the town will vote to enact charter blank of the Town of Abington bylaws. So I guess it's a town bylaw entitled Stretch Energy Code for the purpose of regulating the design and construction of buildings for the effective use of energy pursuant to Appendix 115 AA of the Massachusetts Building Code 780 CMR, the Stretch Energy Code, including future additions, amendments, or modifications thereto, which bylaw shall read as follows. And it goes on for a full page. So, in other words, instead of me rambling on and on, we're going to ask town manager to briefly, if you would, explain
Yes.
what the Stretch Energy Code is.
Sure, I will actually allow our guests to do that, but if you give me 30 seconds for us, a little bit of background, Mr. Chairman, if you wouldn't mind. We have, this is a project that goes back a little bit in time, and that our SAGE group was working on this in years past, and it's kind of went by the wayside for various reasons. And recently, as you know, going back several months, there's been a little bit of new energy and effort by the SAGE group to bring this forward. The SAGE group as a committee and our office have worked with our consultants with the Old Colony Planning Council that have done an inventory of where we stand with regard to becoming a green community. And this is the only piece that would have to be adopted by town meeting. Our zoning is in place. It meets the needs to become a green community, but the stretch code is the piece that would still need to be adopted by town meeting. The other areas that need to be addressed can be done internally through policy and administrative actions. So through the efforts of Eric and Arbeen and Seth Pickering, who's at the Department of Energy, Department of Environmental Affairs, they've been able to get us some guests through the DOER. Joanne Becerra with the Green Communities Division, acting director, and Mike Berry was consultant with DOER to actually discuss both the stretch code and the Green Communities Act in general with us tonight. So I feel more comfortable if they could do that rather than me try to
If you wouldn't
explain
mind
that.
coming up to the microphone, please, we appreciate it.
So-
And I just want to remind you, the Celtics start at 8, that's all. Oh, you have a presentation?
Yes.
I'm originally from New Jersey, I'll talk fast.
Oh,
Excellent.
good.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Mike is handing out a brief slide presentation to follow along, and I have one copy of the grants for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll speak to the microphone, so
Yeah, and just briefly, Krista and Terry Mays of our SAGE committee are here tonight, too, as interested parties, as they helped facilitate this tonight, too, so.
terrific. Well, thank you so much for inviting us. I've never been to Abington before, so it's a lovely town, and thank you for inviting myself and Mike Berry to talk about the Green Communities Program and the stretch code in particular. Seth Pickering had another engagement, so I'm standing in for him. So he's your point of contact, and I'm the Deputy Director, Acting Director right now of the Green Communities, and happy to talk briefly about the program. And Mike Berry is our subject matter specialist on stretch code and building code, and he could answer all sorts of technical questions that I wouldn't be able to answer. So we kind of tag team this. So a little bit about the Green Communities Division. We're here obviously to talk about the Green Communities Designation and Grant Program, but we also do other energy initiatives for cities and towns. So even down the road, if Abington chooses not to become a green community yet, we're still here to serve you for a variety of grants and resources that are available. Turning to page 2, slide number 3 is the actual requirements to become a green communities. It's established in statute. The town manager alluded to some of the others that the town already is meeting through the zoning and permitting and is working on internally for the fuel-efficient vehicle policy and the energy reduction plan. So we're here just to talk about primarily the 5th criteria, the stretch code. The actual statute language is in that slide that talks about new residential construction and new commercial and industrial real estate to minimize life cycle costs. So that was in the law, so we said, well, how do we do that? And sort of concurrently to all this, the Board of Building Regulation and Standards was coming up with this new, more energy-efficient building code that is a local option for communities to adopt, either through town meeting or city council, if you're a city. So that's how we're interpreting how to meet that. So a little bit about the process, and it sounds like, again, the town is well on its way, meeting with your regional coordinator, Seth Pickering, and others through the Planning Council and volunteers to figure out if it makes sense, and then work on meeting the 5 criteria. I'm not going to go through too much. I realize I stapled this in a weird way, didn't I? I'm not going to talk about the as-of-right siding, because you already read all that, so we could skip over that. I suspect if the town decides to move forward to put this warrant article on the town meeting warrant, the town will start working on the energy reduction plan and moving forward with that. A little bit about the timing. We typically have designation rounds in the late fall, so at the end of October, we expect communities to submit the application materials to us. So if the town has a fall town meeting, just to throw that out there in terms of timing, because Seth did share that this was sort of, not a sudden thing, but this is the first time that we are here talking about the stretch code, and sometimes it requires, some education and outreach to the community and the voters and the residents, so I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm going to jump ahead to sort of the back of the presentation, talking about why you're going to do this. So essentially, you're doing this to get access to some grant funds, and also to reduce operating costs for the community. So green communities receive grants of up to, the base grant is $125,000 plus a kicker based on the community's size and socioeconomic per capita. So that you get the designation grant. The handout I put on the table describes all the different projects that other communities have done throughout the years. And the good news is you're not one and done. Once you complete all those grant projects, you can then apply for a competitive grant. So on the back, you can see what some of your neighbors have received throughout the years. Hanover has received 5 grants from us since they became designated in 2010 with over $800,000. Kingston's been active as well. The funds are there, and these are for real projects to reduce energy costs, upgrade buildings, make them more comfortable for the users, town employees, school children, and so forth. It's a voluntary program, so if you become a green community and, 3 years from now, you're like, we don't want to do it anymore, you could just, rescind the stretch code. It's not a binding vote. That's basically it. If you have any questions about the program or the process, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll have my buddy Mike Berry talk about the stretch code, and I'll be here to answer questions as well.
Does anybody have any questions for Joanne?
Because 2 questions I have that I think Mike might be answering, and if he is, just please tell me. One is how is the grant, how is the program funded?
Mm-hmm.
And again, so I see some of the misconceptions. I think Mike's probably going to
Yes,
be
he'll
addressing
talk
those,
about
but
that,
the
yeah.
funding mechanism for the grants themselves, whereas
Sure. So, lucky for us, we're not part of the, we don't get funding from tax revenue, so the governor had some bad budget news this morning, unfortunately. We get our funding either through proceeds of the carbon trading through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, otherwise known as RGGI. It's a 6 or 7 state agreement where high polluting power plants pay into carbon allowances, or something called the alternative compliance payments, and it's related to that as well. So the funds are there. We've, since 2010, awarded, I think, over $60 million in grants. We now have 185 green communities. We have 195 stretch code communities. I think in the past 2 weeks, 6 or 7 towns voted it in. So you'd be in good company if you choose to go that way. The funding will be there for the foreseeable future until we stop polluting or somebody changes the law. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you.
So for those who are following along, I'm going to start on
slide 9 on page 5. Thank you for having me. This is not my first time in Abington, so I'm happy to be back in your town. I've been here before to work with some builders. My day job, I run the Mass Residential New Construction Program for Mass Save, which we provide incentives. I'll talk about that a little bit in some of my slides. But we provide incentives to builders to build more efficient housing. So criteria 5, the stretch code, really looks at the life cycle of a home. It looks at how people are going to maintain a home over the course of its life. How are they going to keep it heated? How are they going to keep the lights on? How is it going to perform? Looking at just better building practices overall. It's not that the current building code in Massachusetts or the current energy code you have today in Abington isn't good. In fact, it's very good. But the stretch code really focuses on what they call performance path construction, which is making sure the homes perform as they should, not just how the code writes that a building should perform. When we used to go out and do these talks, the first one I probably did way back when, 2010 in Kingston, the stretch code was quite a stretch. It was two codes ahead of its time, and builders really were stretching to learn how to do it. Builders were really stretching to get to that point. On January 1st of this year, the state of Massachusetts adopted a new base energy code. Abington got a new energy code on January 1st. The state also adopted a new stretch code. The idea with the stretch code was not to make it as much of a stretch. We're moving at a pretty rapid rate with our code adoption right now, and builders need to keep up. So what the state decided to do is align the two codes. So the code you currently have today in Abington allows builders to build homes essentially two ways. One is prescriptively, which they build to the code. It tells them how much insulation they have to put in, what kind of windows, what kind of equipment, how the house is supposed to be built. The second way that a home can be built is what they call the performance path. Performance path allows what they call trade-offs. So a builder can trade off doing maybe less insulation, putting in better windows, putting in better mechanical or a different type of window. It doesn't have you follow the hard guidelines as a code. So currently today in Abington, you can build a house through these two paths. What the state decided to do is they decided for the new stretch code to just remove the prescriptive path. So the stretch code only affects new construction of residential and commercial buildings, and it focuses those types of construction practices on this performance path construction. Additions, renovations for both residential and commercial buildings default to the base code you currently have here in town today. So this is a pretty big change from the stretch code of the past. But again, the state wanted us to focus on what's important is performance-based construction. Also, as of January 1st, builders are required to, whether they're building prescriptively or through the performance path, to work with what they call a home energy rater or some type of performance contract to do what they call duct testing and infiltration testing. So part of performance testing is already being done today in Abington as a requirement by code. So again, this is why the stretch code is no longer a stretch. If you're following along, I'm going to go to the next page. So some of the misconceptions about the stretch code early on, and I've been doing, this is my 106th presentation on the stretch code, is that everyone in the town is going to have to update their home. If our town adopts the stretch code, regardless of what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to meet the stretch code. That's actually not true. Again, it's only for residential new construction and commercial construction. If you're doing an addition, you're doing a renovation, the stretch code asks nothing more of you than the current code today in Abington has. We hear all the time people being concerned if I'm doing a kitchen renovation that I'm going to have to bring my house up to the stretch code. The stretch code is it only affects things that trigger the energy code today, the same code you have in Abington. So if you're not touching any exterior walls, you're not doing any windows, you're not doing anything like that, the stretch code doesn't apply, as it wouldn't, the base energy code wouldn't apply today in Abington. I think one of the big concerns in a lot of towns I hear all the time is, well, you know, Mike, if we build these homes, we're going to build these homes tight. We're going to build them, and we're going to have sick house syndrome, and we're going to have these homes that don't breathe well. The current base code you have in Abington today addresses not only infiltration, so again, how tight is a home, but it also addresses how we ventilate. The old saying is when you insulate, you ventilate. The tighter you get a home, you want it to ventilate. people say, well, yeah, but it's nice to have a house leak a little bit. Well, it is. You want a house to breathe, but you want it to breathe through mechanical or through some type of apparatus that's going to actually control the air movement, not just what's going to happen on a breezy, cold day. The code already today, the code you have addresses ventilation. The stretch code takes it one step beyond. Working with a home energy rater, they're going to do what they call modeled construction. What they're going to do is they're going to take a set of plans and put it through a modeling software program, and part of that is going to say, based on this house, it's a 3-bedroom home, the number of occupants, this is how much ventilation you need. So working with a home energy rater, you're hedging your bets that your house is going to be ventilated right, instead of just going through the prescriptive path and saying, we might get there. You're building, again, this is the life cycle cost part of this discussion and why we test performance, and this is segueing into slide 12. It's not that the prescriptive code is bad. The prescriptive code is good. It just says, install this, install this, install this, and you're compliant to the code. It doesn't test. So those tiny little air gaps that we could be sealing up, those areas where we may not have installed insulation well, we may have pushed it a little too tight or wrapped it around a outlet box, those little air gaps really add up and can really create an issue where a house leaks too much and takes too much to heat. HERS raters, the home energy raters that are currently being used, as I mentioned today, in Abington to do the infiltration and duct testing, all the stretch code requires them to do is to do the modeling. So a HERS rater, the next slide is slide 13. If you notice, I changed the steps of what a HERS rater does. What you see in blue is what is added by the adoption of the stretch code. What's in black is already currently being done today in Abington by code requirements. So all you're asking builders to do when you adopt the stretch code is to model energy. They're already working with a HERS rater or a performance contractor who can do this work. They may not be having it done because they're doing the prescriptive path. The HERS rater looks at how a house heats, cools. They look at every factor of a home. They want to make sure that the heating equipment that's supposed to be installed is being installed properly. It's essentially a third set of eyes on a job. This does not detract from your local building inspector's job. He's still out there, or he or she is still out there checking for code, for the building code, the plumbing code, the electrical code. This just allows someone out there verifying that the energy code's being met and a home's going to be performed as it should. The next slide, I'm going to move on to page 8. So why I think lately we're seeing the fast adoption of the stretch code is because builders are nomadic. They don't work in one town unless typically you're in Nantucket, and builders don't tend to leave Nantucket to build. And I've done this presentation on Nantucket, so I know that. But builders are nomadic, so they're, as Joanne showed you, are your neighboring towns who are green communities. Typically, builders who are working in Abington today are working in green communities like Hanover and Kingston. What they're doing is they're also leveraging the residential new construction program, the one I mentioned early on that I actually currently run. Builders, architects, design firms, homeowners, anyone can apply for these funds. And these funds are used to offset the costs of building beyond code. So not only are we today talking about a code that's a little bit more than what the base code is today in Abington, this is going to push builders a little bit further, but it's going to incentivize them to do so. These are eligible to any builder building in what we call an owner-investor utility territory, which you guys currently have an owner-investor utility here, and you take part in Mass Save. So you're already doing this. Last year, 43% of the homes built in Massachusetts voluntarily went through this program. So 43% of the homes being built were tapping into these funds. In Abington, in 2015, 36 homes built beyond the stretch code and received funds through the Mass Save program. 2016, 11 did. Right now, in 2017, 10 have completed, with another 33 in the pipeline to complete. So builders are already building in this town beyond the stretch code. So we know builders are capable of doing this work, and again, I think that's why we're seeing 195 communities adopt the stretch code thus far, because honestly, it's no longer a stretch. We're going to hand out later 2 documents that
Is it right now? That's
are
right
very,
here?
very colorful. Yeah. These are cost analysis. These show a home built to the base energy code that you currently have today in Abington and what it takes to get to the stretch code. Yep. We'll just look at the 2,200 square foot home, which is the one Joanne just handed out. This is the average size home we're seeing built across Massachusetts, heated with natural gas. If this home was built to the base code, you would hit what they would call, if you're looking at the front page, which is this page here. If you look over here, if you built to the base code, you'd hit a 62. The stretch code and the performance path currently in Abington requires you to hit a 55. To get there, the cost for a builder would be roughly about $2,017. If you flip to the back, it will show you on this side what was added to the home. One of the things that performance path construction and stretch code allows you to do is you are allowed to use your mechanicals, so your heating, your cooling, your hot water equipment, towards meeting this score. So what you'll see on this house here is the builder took advantage of the mechanical equipment, put in higher efficiency equipment. The cost of that equipment is offset by the Mass Save program, making this house cash positive, actually way out ahead right on day one. This is also factoring in heating prices back from March 2016, and anyone knows you can hedge your bets on a lot of things. You can get a 30-year fixed mortgage now, I think roughly about 4% still. But one thing we know, you're not going to be able to fix energy prices. So if you're rolling the initial cost into the construction of your home, you're looking at a situation where you're putting a homeowner in a great position to maintain their house over a long period of time. So, yeah. With that, I won't get into the 3,800 square foot one because honestly, bigger homes save more energy. It's actually easier for a bigger home to actually meet the stretch code. So I'll stop and see if there's questions specific to the stretch code.
Board members have any questions? Andy?
What impact would this have on the building department as far as the building inspector and having, what responsibilities does he have if this is adopted?
So the building inspector, based on the fact that we see that some homes are being built to the performance path and going through the new construction program, the building inspector is probably already processing homes through the same system that you would with a stretch code. The only difference, again, is that you're removing the prescriptive path, so the only way you could build a home and, residential or commercial building in excess of 100,000 square feet, mind you, for the commercial buildings, is through some type of performance path. So with your building code official, he still maintains all the things he has to do. The only difference is the construction documents that the builder will give to the code official is the HERS rating, instead of having to fill out like what we call like res check or com check. The HERS rater actually does the documentation for the builder. So it actually helps the builder out too, because the builder doesn't have to fill out those forms. And that's actually what's used for the pulling of the permit and also for the CO at the end of construction.
So the HERS rater is independent from the builder? He has to hire this person to come in and do...
Yeah. So the HERS rater basically is a sub on the job. He's basically your energy guide.
Okay.
So he's going to take those plans and model them and say, hey, listen, as modeled, you meet the HERS 55. Or if you don't, like that house that's 62, would say, change the mechanicals, put in a little better insulation, or change even the orientation of your house on a lot can even give you 2 to 3 points. So the HERS rater is there to make those recommendations. They're already by code doing the testing, so they have to go out and do the infiltration testing. They have to do the duct testing. That's now a requirement of code. The only thing they're doing is that modeling and then going back, taking all the results from the final construction, they feed them back in the energy model, hit enter, shows the house is compliant to code. That document goes to the building permit office, and it's a done deal.
And these HERS raters, I would imagine, are certified by...
So they're certified by a national group called ResNet, Residential Energy Service Network. They're required to maintain their ResNet certification. They have to do continuing education credits. Builders have to make sure that they are. But it's the same thing you would do as if you were a general contractor, you have to make sure your plumber's up to date with his licensing and your electrician. Same thing with your HERS rater.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is there any requirement for record storage or record retention?
So same thing that they're currently holding at any building office. What you would, instead of holding the res check or the final verification that the code was met during construction, all they would hold was this REM rate calculation that actually shows you're compliant. So it's no more documentation that you're currently gathering today.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the issues that Marshall pointed out to me, or the question, he actually mentioned in some ways it would actually make his job not significantly easier, but because of the fact that the HERS rater would actually be doing a lot of the certifications so that he wouldn't have to do, would make his, in some ways, be easier for him. The question he posed would be to what extent there would be public health issues with the tightness of facilities versus, one of the misconceptions that was interesting that you specifically had pointed that out, so.
So I just,
But again, that'd be more of a public health, not a building code issue per se, so.
So I just did Douglas, Massachusetts on Monday night. I presented at their town meeting, and that came up from an architect in the audience. And the architect even said that, that they were aware of the fact that the code at this point addresses ventilation. And so back in the late and mid-'80s, when we were wrapping houses so tight that they couldn't breathe, we learned from our mistakes, which is, a horrible thing to say, but, that's how we get best practices and we learn how to build better homes. And I think that's a testament to the stretch code and to the current code that we have in Massachusetts that we want to address and make our houses perform better. So, and it is true, we actually are seeing a large turnover too in building code officials, where we're seeing some building code officials who want to focus on things like public safety issues and don't have the time or even the knowledge to understand the energy code portion. So what they do is they love the fact that they get this document, says it's compliant, the HERS rater verifies it, provides the documentation, and that's what all the building official needs. So it actually does make their job easier when it comes to the energy code. It's one less code they have to be kind of a master of.
If I may, I am a builder, and we always build this way because we have the HERS rater that is there to help us, and we don't really need to know all the codes and everything. And like you said, we give them a set of plans before we even pull the building permit, and he goes through them, tells us what we need to do, gives us the form, we apply for the permit. And it is easier on the building inspector, and it's easier on a builder.
Yeah.
And I think most builders are in favor of doing this.
Yeah.
If you're doing spec homes, it's a great selling point, for a 5-star rating for a home. And if you're doing a spec home, the builder is getting the rebates, and it's not costing any more. As a matter of fact, they're probably making a little extra by doing this.
Yeah, exactly, I couldn't have said it better. We have builders down the Pine Hills in Plymouth, and they're not even a green community or adopt a stretch code, but they go through my program, and they actually compete with each other. Like, one company will hit a HERS 55, and then next thing, the company down the road that's building another set of townhomes will be like, well, we're at a 48 now. So when people are touring them, they actually have the HERS certificate out showing what the house performs at.
It's a great selling point.
Yeah, it is.
I'm sorry. The residential incentives, where do those come from?
Those
How are
come through.
funded?
Those come through the Mass Save program, which is funded through ratepayer funds. So if you're paying a utility bill here in Massachusetts, there's a breakdown inside your bill where it shows, like, for transmission, transition, one of the things is renewable energy, another is conservation. So we all, as residents in Massachusetts, pay into the conservation fund. So that conservation fund is then broken up into things like an existing homes program, new construction, commercial, low-income, moderate-income programs, appliance rebate programs. So we all pay into it.
So those funds should be available.
So the utility companies have to file what they call a 3-year plan. We're in the middle of the current 3-year plan, and to be honest with you, because of things like the shutdown of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, with not another one coming online, utility companies have to do a lot more with a lot less. So they're actually getting incentivized internally to actually conserve more energy. So we've actually seen an incredible amount of money being injected into the residential and commercial programs because there's a need, and we're not there yet. And we're going back and retrofitting homes, which obviously is tougher to do at this point.
Thanks.
Yep.
This is a self-serving question. We have town meeting on May 22nd. Would there be somebody there from Green Community in case questions come up?
We could definitely be there. I don't want to speak for Joanne, but
Is that all right with this?
Seth will be available.
yeah, Seth will be available. And if Seth needs me, I'm happy to come.
Seth will be
Now, you we discussed this, and I can ask the safety committee, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, we first brought it up, and there was some pushback from some of the builders. I think even a member of the board at the time was a builder, and some pushback, but now it sounds like the stretch codes are,
Sounds like a whole different
it
ballgame.
sounds like, it is
a whole different ballgame.
They used to say the stretch code was a stretch, it was too far to get to, but now it sounds like it's, I mean, you've been to town meetings, the biggest questions, concerns that are brought up by residents at town meetings are what you had in here about the tight houses and...
Tight houses, cost, are we gonna be pushing people to other communities that don't have the stretch code? And it's getting to the point now, like I said, I've been doing this going on like 7 years?
Yeah.
Wow, 7 years. You know, it's getting to a point now that I would start questioning why you're not a green community. Like, if your neighbors are, what is it in your town that you're not looking at becoming one? But I think the biggest thing I hear is tight homes, cost, and to be honest with you, there's a lot of misinformation out there about repairs and additions. And once we normally say that in a town, and again, I'd love to talk to the building inspector to get a sense of like how many homes are being built in Abington, how many, permits are being pulled for additions, how many permits are being pulled for renovations, because if the renovations and additions outweigh the new construction, then there's no change for additions and renovations, so it should be a kind of a no-brainer.
If we find out who's going to be speaking on behalf of the green communities, maybe they can talk to the building, we can put them in touch with the building inspector ahead of time.
We typically try to do that even prior to coming here, but we just didn't have time, so.
In your program, you mentioned that Cohasset, Hanover, Rockland, Pembroke, Norwell, Situate, Weymouth, and I guess Brockton just adopted it not too long ago
Yeah.
either. So they're all the neighboring communities
Yeah.
pretty much, so you're right, why haven't we done it yet, so. I'm going to open up the floor if anybody on the floor has any questions or comments they want to add. No? That was easy. Last chance, board members, any questions? No. I want to thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Celtics.
Next, Article 18, amend zoning bylaw 175-35. Again, let's see how long that is and see if I can read it. Oh, it's a short one. To see if the town will vote to amend the zoning bylaw 175-35 as follows. Insert the following at the end of the existing section. We discussed this at the last meeting. In quotes, for the purposes of this bylaw, in cases of a building permit involving a one or two-family dwelling, the word board, as found throughout this bylaw, shall be deemed to refer to the Board of Appeals. For building permits involving all other structures, for example, multifamily, commercial, definitive subdivision, mixed use, the word board, as found in this bylaw, shall be deemed to refer to as the planning board. And a couple other things. So this article is presented by the planning board. I know we had some discussion as a board about this, and we wanted to see if some members of the planning board could come to basically clarify. Rick, did you want to speak to this, or did anybody want to speak to this at the planning board? Thank you.
I think, Ken, we also wanted to get the input from the zoning board to see if they had discussed it.
That is true, too, actually, because the zoning board of appeals is mentioned in this article, so maybe you can just give us a quick rundown. I know that the chairman, Mr. Smith, discussed that this is a practice that's already happening now, but you just wanted to have it in the bylaws?
Not quite. Just for the record, Rick Collins, 74 Orange Street, I'm a member of the planning board. The impetus behind this is simply to try to streamline some of our permitting processes. So right now, the way that it works is that you would have a project come through, go through the complete site plan process, have the engineers done, have the engineers in the room, have all the neighbors in the room, have all the abutters, go through the hearing process, get approved, and then have to go to a separate, call another public hearing with the zoning board to get this additional approval, and again, bring back all of the engineers, all of the reports, all of the site plans, all the neighbors, everything else. The idea was that if they don't have to go to the zoning board for anything else regarding the project, and it doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen on occasion, that just have the planning board give the sign-off. This is nothing more than just trying to save people who are investing in this community some time.
Members of the board have questions, or, I guess we can start by asking members of the zoning board that are in attendance. I see Bill Mullen and John Shepherd. Would you like to get up and just, I guess basically we want to know that if you've been contacted about this, or what your opinions are on it. And then we can discuss it as a board, if that's all right. If you can just state your name and address, please, Bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Bill Mullen, 25 Block Street here in town. With me is Mr. Shepherd. We have a slightly different take on this amendment, where as much as in some ways we would love to have fewer hearings, in many towns, and Mr. Shepherd may be able to speak more to this, they require to do all the site plans and all the review and all the engineering and all that stuff, and then they get the blessing, and then they come before the zoning board of appeals. Oftentimes, they come to us here in town first. You know, they don't necessarily have all the engineering done, they don't have all the elevations, all that stuff done, because when they're coming to us, they're looking for, can we build in the floodplain wetland protection district? Can we, in theory, have the parking in the back or in the side contrary to the zoning? So we, as a board, are, I think, less concerned about the things that planning needs to make their minds up about, and more about, you know, yes, on the floodplain, what, you know, that sort of thing. So we're not asking the gentleman to come and spend thousands of dollars in engineering diagrams and that sort of thing first, and oftentimes that's why we allow it. Wherein, you know, if they build everything and do all the plans and say, all right, we're building it this way, and then we on the zoning board of appeals say, well, we're sorry, you can't put the driveway there. They have to go back to the drawing board. So frequently they come to us on the concept, is it okay if we put the driveway here first and foremost? You know, we're not engineers, we're not conservation, we're not even the planning department, so, you know, we're going to trust the other boards to do their thing. So we try not to burden them with, you know, thousands of dollars worth of engineering ahead of time for oftentimes the simple things we look at. Another point that one of the colleagues who is not here pointed out was he was concerned about a slight issue of discrimination where there would be one board for residential and one board for commercial, for oftentimes the same things. So those were, I think, and again, God bless you for trying to take a hearing away from. Thank you. But I'm just not sure this works in this case. Mr. Shepherd?
John Shepherd, 560 Bedford Street. To go along, he said it pretty well. The problem that I have seen being on this board now for over 5 years is that we get, being first, and again, we just had a training session with town council, and in most towns, and I've gone to a lot of towns and checked with them, zoning is the last, not the first. So in this case, we've had cases where people come in front of us, petitioners, without any information. So we'll say, what size is the building? Well, we don't know yet. What does the people plan on doing here, the commercial people planning? We don't know yet. How can we make a decision? And we were put in that position, and I frankly will not allow that, as far as I'm concerned, to happen again. So that's my concern, number one and foremost, that that information that we get has to be given to us, and I don't care if you give it to us at the end or the beginning. The cost factor, according to state law and town law, is it's the responsibility of the petitioner to come in front of us with the required information and plans. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board members have wanted to weigh in on this. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Not even a counterpoint.
No.
Just one other quick thing I feel is worth addressing. I think there's a legitimate criticism about maybe the planning board not communicating what we're looking to do with other boards sufficiently, that in the old days, it's just we call a public hearing, there's a legal notice in the paper of public record, but frankly, that's not enough nowadays. And I think that, I think the pledge on our behalf is that moving forward, we'll do a better job making sure that there's direct communication with impacted boards, the Board of Selectmen, and other boards in the town, so that they understand what we're doing and when we're doing it and why we're doing it.
That's a good point. I think we're all guilty of that.
Great point, Rick,
You know,
thank you. Yeah.
Nobody reads the paper anymore, honestly. Board members, anything to weigh in on this at all?
Well, I agree with the fact that I don't like the fact that there's two different boards deciding the same issue, just because one happens to be a single family or a two-family versus a commercial or a beyond two-family. What I would like to see is what Rick just suggested. I think everybody needs to sit down. If this is something that needs to be done, then everybody should sit down and try to work it out, so everybody's on the same page as to let's draft a change. If we need to draft a change, let everybody weigh in on it, and if we have to, and bring it back next year. It's not.
Similar to the lesson we learned at last year's town meeting about the sign bylaw.
Exactly, yeah. And I just think it makes, we're all supposed to be working towards the same end here. The planning board, the zoning board, the Board of Selectmen, for the benefit of the town. And it seems as though recently there's been a lot of this when we're all supposed to be working together.
And I don't even think I don't think it's on purpose either. I just think it's
not necessarily.
people trying to make improvements.
Yeah.
Any other board members want to weigh in on this? Okay. I guess we'll go to the next article that we had. People would talk about Article 21, which is, hopefully it's a short one. It is. This is by the zoning enforcement officers. That would be the zoning board, I believe. I'm not positive, but
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes,
could just
please.
actually, in both 21 and 22, I would take those more to the extent that the zoning, the planning board or the zoning board of appeals would support these to the extent that they would, either one or both boards would be willing to actually sponsor the articles, as opposed to, the zoning enforcement officer per se. It's my understanding that he was providing these as informational or as advice or counsel to
when you say he, you mean,
as Marshall Adams
Okay,
as
I
zoning
just wanted to
enforcement.
make sure.
So just as a caveat to, to the discussion on these, so.
all right, let me read Article 21, and then we'll ask planning board members and/or zoning board members to maybe speak a little bit on it. I mean, sometimes this stuff gets a little technical. I mean, these are short articles, but still, deleting and replacing, it's just a little confusing. So, Article 21, to see if the town will vote to amend the Town of Abington zoning bylaw, Article KK, definitions by making the changes to the definition of apartment as shown below. Apartment is amended by deleting the current definition, a building exclusively for residential use with 3 or more dwelling units for rent. Apartment is amended by replacing the current definition, 1 or more rooms forming a habitable unit containing complete and independent living facilities, or take any other action thereto. So my understanding is they're gonna delete the wording of building, the definition for apartment, a building exclusively for residential use with 3 or more dwelling units, and replace it with 1 or more rooms forming a habitable unit containing complete and independent living facilities. Is that, why don't I read 22, and then we can ask the folks from the two boards to come up and talk about this, if that's agreeable to the board? Article 22, to see if the town will vote to amend the Town of Abington zoning bylaw, Article V, use regulations. Table of use regulations under principal use, Section E, retail business under service establishments under 12, tattoo parlor or body piercing business, by making the following changes as shown. Amend by deleting the current N in zoning district HC, amend by replacing to SP in zoning district HC, or take any other action relative thereto. N stands for,
No,
what is it?
no.
No, and then,
Not allowed.
and then replace it with SP, which is special permit, I believe. Could we have you folks come up again, do you mind, or anybody want to speak on it? Zoning Board of Appeals members coming back up. And I'm sorry, the Planning Board too. All right, so Article 21. Maybe a brief recap of what that means. You're changing the definition of apartment.
Absolutely. This is something we actually conferred, this came from Marshall, the building inspector. We conferred also with town council on this while we were in audience with her a couple days ago. There seems to be a weakness in the town's definition here in the zoning bylaws where, a building exclusively for residential use with 3 or more dwelling units for rent. There are many units that have one apartment. It's a two, and so it's a flaw, and that makes it difficult for the zoning enforcement officer to enforce the zoning regs. So by replacing it with basically, 1 or more rooms forming a habitable unit containing complete and independent living facilities, I think that becomes just a much broader definition, especially the way, people are restructuring their houses these days.
Actually, that was a very good explanation, so a lot better than we could have done.
And to add to that, town council, when we asked her, she's the one that came up with this basic definition. So it is her recommendation that we use this language.
Okay. And Rick, did you want to speak? Okay, you're all set. Perfect. Andy?
Just to Rick's point, Bill, did you guys take a vote on this
We
particular?
did, and it was unanimous that we felt that this would help Marshall.
So I would have no problem if you guys think it's advisable to let you guys sponsor this particular article.
We appreciate
As
that.
opposed to the zoning enforcement officer.
Thank you.
To me, it makes sense.
All right. Bob has a question?
Was there any consideration with the Board of Health? Because I know in our health regulations, we deem of who gets trash barrels and who doesn't get trash barrels. There's 3 or less units or 3 or more units. If we change the definition by which we identify apartments, how does that affect our trash pickup if we're now measuring not by the number of units or the number of residents in the building, but by the number of units in the building? How would that be amended or helped, or how do we handle that? Because trash right now, we give barrels to anyone with 3 or less units in it.
Family or less. Yeah.
And then now we're going to a change in the regulation in the zone of how we identify what an apartment is or what it will be. And what are we going to do to clarify our Board of Health regulations to handle the trash collection?
I don't really think that will have an effect. It's still going to be a
It's still
two-family.
gonna, a 3-family is still gonna be a 3-family.
But we define a 3-family, the 3-family is what? 3 apartments? Or is it 3 units?
Apartment would be a unit in
Yeah.
this case,
So-
would
Yes.
not.
The word apartment is still going to stay in there. It's just how they define apartment.
I know, and they define apartment, the replacement language, if I'm reading it correctly, is a habitable unit containing a complete and independent living facility to take other action too.
A
So,
one-room.
One or more
One or
rooms,
more
would
room
be a
as
one-
as
yeah,
opposed to
would be a
a,
one-room apartment.
right.
as long as it's got a kitchen. Or-
So, not being up on the health codes, am I to understand that if Mr. Shepherd owned a house with an, excuse me, with an in-law apartment, he would have 1 set of barrels? Or would he call the health department and say, I need a
If
second
this,
set of
if
barrels?
I'm understanding this correctly, they're gonna get 2 sets of
Well,
barrels.
no, under the existing
Yeah,
code.
existing.
Under the existing
The
code.
existing code, you get
You get
a
two,
green
yeah.
one and a yellow one. Is that how it works right now?
Because there's 2
In-law
different
would have
independent
2 of
living.
each.
So you would
In-law
get
would have
2.
an apartment.
Right.
Right.
Each one would get one.
So I'm not, I mean, it's a
So I don't
great
think
point,
this
but
would
I'm not
really
sure it.
change.
I
Yeah, no, I think you're, good question, but I think this would,
I just wanna make sure, that's
Yeah.
all, because we do base our trash on that specific standard. I just wanna make sure we weren't making changes that were gonna affect the trash.
Does this wording have any effect on the planning board at all? No? Okay. No. I didn't think so. All right. Any other questions from the board? On 22, which is basically changing the tattoo parlor and body piercing businesses from not allowing them in zoning district HC to requiring them to have a special permit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Historically, I could check my chart, tattoo parlors are allowed, since the zoning was created, only in industrial.
No, I think they've moved it back and forth. No? Yes?
but
Industrial.
Is it, currently, it's industrial.
Yes.
yeah, with a special permit in industrial.
Right. Everything else is basically not allowed which means you have to get a variance. Okay, so a variance is a much higher threshold. Additionally, once a variance is issued, if that particular business goes out and under, someone else can hop right in without any other permission.
They
'Cause
can
the variance
piggyback,
goes
they can
with the
piggyback on
property.
the existing?
Variance stays with
I'm
They
sorry?
piggyback on the existing?
Yes, yes, it can grandfather out after, I think, a couple years of non-use. But we ran into this recently where, for the most part, it seemed like a reasonable location. But instead of being able to give that applicant a special permit, wherein if for some reason their business case and business model did not work, and they went out, the next tenant would have to come back to us and ask permission again. We had to grant them a variance, wherein, so we've kind of, changed the use, in essence, almost forever for that. I think that when the amendment, when the zoning was written for tattoo parlors, it was probably written just as they became legal, whatever it was, 20-something years ago, and there was a stigma about it. And so they said, let's just put it out on the industrial wings of our zoning. I'm not a big tattoo fan, but
Oh, come on,
I
I've
don't
seen it
think it's,
before.
I don't think it's the gateway to evil.
I don't know.
No checking.
No, times have changed a lot.
It's not the gateway to evil that I think people thought it was decades ago. So we would like to just be able to say, all right, Mr. Manning, you can have a special permit for a tattoo parlor there, and then if your business case does not work and you vacate that shop in X number of years, it's not an automatic yes for the next person. Thank you.
And so the ZBA is willing to sponsor that
Yeah,
one too, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you guys take a vote on this one?
We did, and it was unanimous.
Okay.
Was that correct?
I had
Mostly
some-
unanimous?
I probably, the only one that was, I was just, the way it happened, here's the problem we have in the town, but that's a subject, topic of another time. But you have a land use, when you have land use, which most towns do not have, but Abington does. So that gives that person that can't get it under the normal circumstances, which by state law is to be given out only under rare circumstances. So that was a very tough night for me at that meeting. But that's where we run into the problem, because it was a land use. Had that not been a land use in our constitution or our charter, that would not have gone through, because it's not to be used in an N. N means no. And that's how I took it, and that's why I was against it. So I don't have that big a deal with it, but I just have to go with what the rules I have, and that's why I was against it.
See, you're tough. Okay. Any other questions from the board? Are you all set? Okay. All right, thank you. And there's one other thing that you guys might want to stick around for. And this, the reason this is on the agenda, and I know that I caught a little bit of flack, and rightfully so. As vice chairman, I was the acting chairman. I was approached by one of the members of the board to bring this up for reconsideration. Generally, Robert's Rules of Order and our past practice is that only a person who voted in the positive can bring up an issue for a revote, and maybe I'm not wording it correctly.
Negative.
In the negative, I'm sorry, but, so, that is why I allowed it to go. The reason is that I allowed it to go through is we basically have a new board now, and we have a new member, and I wanted to make sure that that member, if he felt that he wanted to weigh in on this question, could. And also, a certain board in town, well, the planning board did a lot of work and tried to put an article that they thought was a good article, so I just wanted to bring it back up. And I actually didn't, on the agenda, I didn't say reconsider, I just said discussion, but it is what it is. So, that was, do you remember what article number it was?
It was 49. I'm sorry,
No, it's
chapter
chapter
49.
49.
They did a handout tonight.
I do have a copy of it, but I
Because
didn't
loose-
I got it here.
see where it was removed already. It doesn't
I think it was Article 19.
specifically have a number anymore.
I believe it's Article 19.
Okay, that was the old,
2021, actually, it was.
21.
Oh, well, again, they've moved around a little bit as articles have
and this is, I have a big X through it, so it tells you how our vote went. It's kind of a long article, and if I could maybe call upon Planning Board member Rick Collins to give us, again, a synopsis on what it entails, if you wouldn't mind.
No, it's, they should have one.
The quick history is, I believe, last year, the town's had a fill bylaw for a while, meaning that if someone's going to take and haul around and dump a bunch of fill, they have to come and get a permit. And, I think in some towns it was there because of sand pits and other, industrial uses, but I'm not sure the origin of Abington's. At the very least, though, it had been a Board of Selectmen license. In the past year, it switched over to a planning board permit. And in reviewing it, we realized there was a few pieces of it that we think should be changed. These are the basic highlights. Right now, the threshold is 100 cubic yards, and we're suggesting going up to 250 cubic yards. The reason being is if you have a 16 by 32 by 6 swimming pool, which is a pretty standard sized swimming pool, that's 113 cubic yards. So you run the risk of, if someone's doing a swimming pool project, if someone's doing a backyard landscaping project, we're 100 by 100, times 4 inches thick, you're still over 100 cubic yards. That we thought the threshold should be raised so that it really more addresses subdivisions and other larger scale projects. The other change is, right now, two abutters within 300 feet have to be notified, and we're just dialing that back to direct abutters. We require them to be notified currently by certified mail. This would change it to first-class mail. Our experience in our public hearings where we require first-class mail notification is that people get the notifications. They actually get them more sometimes than the certified mail because they don't have to actually go and pick them up at the post office. Right now, there's a requirement that they tell us the origin of the fill. We'd strike that. There's a requirement to list the size of trucks that would be used to haul it in and out. One of the reasons we're thinking about striking that is because, if it's going to take 3 tractor trailers to haul it in, and one of them's broken down that day, now they have to use a couple smaller ones, are they technically in violation if they don't use the specific ones they suggested? Currently, the permit has a 1-year expiration date. The argument is that with a lot of subdivision projects and larger scale projects, they're not going to be finished within a year of the issuance, especially if they hit any sort of either permitting delays, appeals delays, just basic construction timeline. So we're expanding it to 2 years. And finally, the last one is that we're including a exemption for municipal projects. So for instance, currently, under the rules, if there's some fill being brought in or gravel being brought in at Griffin's Dairy, they would have to submit information to the planning board before they can do that. And this would remove that exemption for municipal-based projects. Those are the main highlights.
Just to go back, Rick, it used to be, I'm sorry, the other Rick, it used to be that the Board of Selectmen had control over this, correct? It was, if you wanted to bring in fill for a project, you had to get approval. I don't think we only issued like one that I can recall of.
Yeah.
And that was for anything over 100?
It was, I believe, 100 cubic yards was the threshold, and I believe permit was good for a year. Typical abutters notices, posting of a bond. People actually, more or less, the way it is now, simply the permitting authority was the Board of Selectmen, I think it was, yes.
Right, and that changed to the planning board. Was that a town meeting vote? Was that a bylaw? Was that just a rule?
Change in the bylaw.
It's a
yes,
bylaw, so it's a
yes.
bylaw right now.
Right, and I think it was I think that was, the impetus for that was because a lot of, in theory, because some of the projects that would have required that type of movement were a part and parcel of projects that may have already been before the planning board, potentially. So I'm assuming that this was a,
That was actually brought by the bylaw review committee
Yeah.
when they were doing their bylaw review.
Okay.
That was the only change that they made to
And-
the entire
right.
article, the
Yeah.
entire.
Was just to switch
bylaw,
the...
just to switch who the permit granting authority was. Yes. And if you recall, Ken, I don't know, back before we had this current bylaw in place, which was put in place, I think 4 or 5 years ago, there was another fill bylaw, but it was just a one-line
Yeah,
bylaw.
Very vague.
Very vague,
Yeah.
had no expiration time on it, so you know, it lasted potentially forever, and that happened here in town, actually with a couple of places that I remember, because they had a permit issued and they, over a period of time, just kept bringing fill in and in and in. So I think that's where that's why this was instituted.
Yeah, Ken, when Ken asked me if I would put this on the agenda for reconsideration, he also asked if I had some time, if I could see how some other towns might handle this, and I did put out a request to some of my peers in other communities, and I didn't have a tremendous amount of time, but looking at about 7 or 8 other towns, it's all over the place, from zero threshold in terms of earth, I don't know how one deals with that, to over 1,000 yards. 500 is typical. Timeframes range from no expiration to 1 year, 18 months with the ability to extend with permission. So to try to find guidelines that might be typical is almost, it's going to be, it's hard to find that. I think each community seems to try to find just that right balance. So it's not like I could find a quick model that would seem to be helpful, Ken, so.
that's fine, I understand. Before I let the board members weigh in on this, I just want to make one comment that it's a little clearer now that you've explained it. And I understand, it seems to me like the main purpose of this bylaw change is mostly for subdivisions and large projects. That's just what I get from what you, I'm more concerned about my neighbors dumping 225, actually, each cubic yard is a ton, so 225 tons of soil in their yard, and leaving a pile there for 3 years. So that's my big concern. But now I'll let the members speak on it, if they want. Anybody has anything to say?
Well, I heard you mention about the origin, can you just give me a little more clarification on that, and who would verify the origin of where it's coming from?
Well, that's, one of the issues is that there is no language in place to actually verify. The idea is that if, you're using fill that may or may not been from a contaminated site, or was been, reprocessed from a contaminated site, I'm sure the old example is soil coming out of the big dig and being dumped and being used for fill in certain places, that we want to at least know where it's coming from. But you're right, there is no real mechanism in place to be able to verify it. I mean, it would be a more costly endeavor to get a guarantee that this came from a sand and gravel pit in Carver.
You would agree that you'd want to verify that, wouldn't you?
I mean, if you could, it would be great.
I sort of agree with Ken. I don't want somebody, I don't know what they're dumping next to my land, and I've seen it in a couple of places here in Abington where people are certainly concerned about where the fill is coming from, whether they should be filling at all, but where it's coming from. That would certainly disturb me.
I guess one thing that the board was concerned about is just the board's vote to remove it completely from the warrant. I think we'd be more open respectfully to, if you have amendment to it, discussing that, as opposed to striking the whole proposed amendment. So that if that's something you feel strongly with, and I can't tell you that you're wrong, I would certainly welcome it in the form of an amendment to it. If going from 100 to 250 yards is too much for the board, or they think it's too high, then I would suggest, or I would invite an amendment to it. But
Again,
overall,
my concern would be, I'm not concerned about the amount, mine is the origin. That would really bother me. Like you said, you mentioned it yourself, the big dig, wherever that, I would have a big concern about that, personally. I think a lot of my constituents would too, so.
If I can add to that, being in the petroleum business, that was very common for us, and one thing that we would do is verify it, especially environmental, because just about every old house, they did their oil change and it went out the back door. And that is a huge concern, and I just went through, in my in-laws in New York, I went through that whole process because of that. But the thing is, you can get bill of ladings, and that's required, at least from the environmental end, but any trucker I think Vincent is, I know him through the petroleum bin. I know he knows what I'm talking about. Bill of ladings are nothing more than a paper stating how much soil and what it is. So that could be a thought.
Mr. Chairman, I think, being in the construction business, I don't think there would be any contractor or any developer that would allow 250 cubic yards to come in without knowing where it was coming from and without proof. But that being said, those are not my issues with this. I don't have an opinion on how many. I don't have an opinion on where it's coming from. My point is, another board held public hearings and put this article on the warrant, and I don't think we should just arbitrarily take it off because we don't like it. I think it should either be, well, I think it should go to town meeting floor, and let the townspeople decide. Like I said, it's not an article that, one of us proposed or something. This was one that had public hearings. And the same with 18. They held public hearings on those. And I think if another board holds a public hearing, I think we owe it to them to at least have it on the warrant. We don't have to endorse it. We can recommend they pass over, whatever we want to do. But because they went through the process and the correct process, I think it should be on the warrant. And that's my only point with it. If you want to discuss how many and where it's coming from and the permitting and the certified mail, that's fine. But I think it should be on the town meeting warrant.
Andy?
And if I could just speak to that, we're the gatekeepers here. This is our warrant. If an article comes down to us that we think is not ready, I'm not saying this is outrageous, but is just beyond what we think is reasonable, we certainly have the right, public hearing or not, to say, we don't think this should be, we get elected for this kind of stuff. We don't think this should be brought in front of the townspeople at this time. As I suggested last week, I have no problem with the planning board going back and again, talking to the Board of Selectmen and whoever else, maybe the Board of Health, and whoever else should be involved in drafting an article like this and bring it back next year. 1 year is not going to make that much of a difference. Rick, you said last week, I think you've had 2 applications for permits for this. If there's another 2 in the year intervening, it's not going to kill anybody. And at that point in time, you're going to have some consensus on the article. I don't think it's a good idea to get up there and start amending, because I've got a lot of amendments personally that I would like to make on this. And if we get to town meeting, what will happen is if there's too many amendments, it'll get turned down anyway. So my thought is, bring it back, talk to everybody, get consensus again, and bring it back next year. That's my feeling.
Andy, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
And I hear what you said, that we're elected and we're sort of the gatekeepers. Planning board or whoever put these articles up are elected also. So I'm sort of caught in between, because I hear what you're saying, that we're elected and we're the gatekeepers, but the planning board holding public meetings, doing all that, and believe me, I've seen a lot of articles from, in different places where it's tied up at town meeting just forever, that, when there could have been more research done and stuff like that. But they're an elected board.
Right, and as you said, we are the gatekeepers, and personally, I don't think this is ready to be presented to town meeting.
This would not be the first article since I've been,
No.
Jim, that we've
Said-
bumped off or said,
No.
please do come back to
Yeah.
us. I have a gentleman that's raised his hand in the audience. Would you like to speak, sir? You come up to the microphone, if you don't mind? No, please, no, come on up and state your name if you don't mind, please.
My name is Vincent DeAndrea. I think most of you know me. I have several projects of my own going on, but to state what John had said over here, any dirt coming from, first of all, the first bylaw of the town here for debris, it was debris. It was 100 yards of debris. If anybody looks up debris, it's trash. There was no bylaw up until a little while ago that they changed it to the 100 yards of dirt, loam, anything. Well, I don't know about you, but there's a lot of people that take 100 yards of loam, 100 yards of mulch. this board is gonna be flooded with things. All these people are doing illegal. There's all kinds of businesses in this town that are delivering that kind of material, okay, by the trailer loads as such. Anyway, what John was talking about, talking about getting dirt from the big dig, that job's over. I don't know what other big job is going on right now as far as any contaminated materials that's big. I mean, that was a big thing back in the day. They filled the quarry over there in Quincy with it, and then they built townhouses on it. I don't know, I guess it worked over there, so, that's not the issue here anyway, but you can get certifications from it, for dirt in any quantity from any legitimate contractor. If you've got Tom, Dick, or Harry down the street that's gonna be taking dirt from someplace and bringing it to a job, he's responsible. I mean, have him make a requirement. You can certainly get it tested. It's not a big deal. But all the material that I know of, that I've ever gotten, is always certified material. So if there's anything wrong with that, it's to the contractor that brings it in. But basically all I have to say. I mean, it's...
But that's not, not to interrupt you, but that's not in...
That's right.
And I haven't read the whole article, it's
been
not...
removed from
Right.
what was
Yeah.
in the existing,
Right.
in the existing
Right.
bylaw. That origin language has been removed.
They've removed it.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
bring up a good point, Mr.
That's all, just, it's material that can be certified, or it can be brought to Tom
Absolutely.
where they cook the material and
Yep,
clean it.
okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Bill?
One thing we tend to hear quite frequently when we're examining projects is the abutters are always concerned as to where the runoff is, how is this project going to affect their yard? Because we all seem to have a sump pump in our basements. That said, in theory, I don't have a problem with not having to go through hoops beyond a normal permitting process to put a pool in. But at the same time, and again, I can't conceptualize what 100 yards of dirt is. I think when you start doubling that or going to an unlimited number, if someone starts using that as a way of shunting water away from their property or something like that, and they can do it without, the planning board or someone going, no, that's okay, I'd be worried, because, I think at that point, I'd ask you guys to look at it and maybe find a threshold that works where, you can put a pool in or something like that, but you can't, berm your yard or raise your yard so that, historically, all the engineers have said, well, you're the low point in the neighborhood, you're getting the water, and now it's like, well, I can put 250,000 yards of dirt in and no longer get the water, and cascade issues down the neighborhood. Thank you.
That's a point well taken. I think I honestly think that's what the premise of this article was. However, I personally, I think that the town will be better served, and the residents will be better served to have two different, if you're gonna do yard work, 100 or under, okay, no permit if you wanna do something like that. But we're talking about, when you're talking about subdivision, some of these are valid points. I think we all brought up, I think you kinda need to know where the fill is, but this is just my personal opinion, but, board members, have anything else to say? Okay. Are we gonna, I guess this brings up the question,
Yeah, I think you have to go back and vote on,
we can vote on the articles?
14, 18, 21, 22, and then whether or not.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
gentlemen.
sure.
Thank you very much. Okay, Article 14 was adoption of the stretch, and do we actually vote on every article already, or did we just
No,
vote?
we
pulled
did
these.
not vote on these four, correct?
No, you have not voted to,
Do we
We
vote on
only
all the
voted
other articles? Do we actually
on
vote to approve them at town meeting, or do we just put
Just
them
to
on?
include them on the
All right, so this is to put these on the warrant. Okay,
Right.
all right, so this is to put these, Article 14, I'll entertain a motion for the adoption of the stretch code to put that on the warrant.
Motion to adopt the stretch energy code to the town warrant.
A motion? I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? Okay. Article 18, amend zoning bylaw 175-35, which was the one that
For the splitting.
Splitting the
just
special
streamlined.
permit granting authority.
Yes, that's by the planning board. Do I have a motion on that, Article 18?
I would make a motion to not include it on the warrant, and again, ask that the planning board, the zoning board, sit down. If this is something that needs to be done, have both boards work on putting together an article that both, I think we heard from the zoning board saying they're not in favor of this, and the planning board is. I think we should try to get some consensus and bring it back next year. So I would make a motion to remove Article 18 from the warrant.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on removing Article 18?
Well, it goes back to my same point. I think they held hearings. I think they did what they were supposed to do. I think if the planning board, I actually believe planning board members were there, and they didn't do anything, so I'm not in favor of removing it.
Any further discussion? All in favor of removing Article 18 from the warrant signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
4 to 1?
I abstain.
Okay, 3-1, one
Sorry,
abstention.
thank you.
That's right. Article 18. Article 21, amend zoning bylaw, the definition of apartment. Is there a motion?
Motion to include, but it's going to be sponsored by
Zoning
Zoning
board.
zoning board. Yeah.
I'll second
Second.
that.
Motion's made and seconded a couple times. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Article 22, amend zoning use regulation. That's for the tattoo parlor and body piercing.
Motion to add the zoning bylaws use regulation as proposed by the zoning board, not by the zoning enforcement officer.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just, not to this particular article, but as far as, I think maybe in future meeting, we should talk about, again, sitting down with the planning board and the zoning board and taking a look at use variances in this town and whether or not they should even be allowed. I have some problems with that, and I've done a bit of research, and there aren't many towns in this area, let alone in Massachusetts, that allow use variances, so I
That's
think...
what John said about that.
I would like to take a look at that. I'll ask you to put up the agenda at some point.
Yeah, well, maybe we could have maybe we can have a joint meeting on.
Yeah.
Great. So, any further discussion on Article 22? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous vote. And last but not least, the material dumping bylaw. Is there any action on that?
I'd make a motion to put it back on the
That's it.
warrant.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I'm hearing no second. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, second.
Motion's made and seconded, and all in favor?
Aye.
Good night.